Welcome to Winning Wednesdays with Pear VC. At Pear, we've been fueling the next generation of tech startups for over 10 years. And working closely with founders since the beginning of their journeys, we've seen again and again that a good product isn't enough to build a meaningful business. You must have a winning strategy in GTM as well. We believe that leveraging community, learning from one another, is key to establishing the right winning mindset, frameworks, and strategies. Enter Winning Wednesdays with Pear VC. It's a bi-weekly 45-minute webinar series on GTM topics that provides actionable insights to founders and teams, building from 0 to 1. Our webinars are broken up in two parts. Part 1 is a 25-minute conversation and presentation with a guest. And part 2 will be a lively Q&A. We are your hosts, Pear GTM team, Pepe and Ana. And today we're super excited to have Mike Molinet with us. Mike is a serial entrepreneur, a business and product management leader, and a good friend of Pear. He's started 2 companies that we've been honored to partner with. He hails from Minnesota and moved to Silicon Valley in 2013 to follow his dreams. Mike took Branch from 0 to 100 million in ARR, and now he's doing it all over again with Thena. The topic today is a hot one, pricing strategy. And Mike, you don't know how many questions we get from founders around pricing, how to think about it, when to have the pricing talk. So we're super excited about it. And earlier this year, Mike shared that Thena has gone through 6 pricing iterations in the last months. So we were very intrigued about your learnings. We know you know a thing or two about nailing down your pricing strategy. So we're pumped to hear your insights. We invite you to turn on your cameras for those that are attending and engage with reaction as Mike shares his talk and presentation. And after he's done with the conversation, we invite you to participate with live questions. Live if you're attending or through the chat if you're shy. So without further ado, we'll give the floor to Mike. Thank you so much for joining.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. Thanks for joining today. Yeah, what I think today's format, we're not going to do slides. We're just going to have kind of an open conversation. So please engage. Anna and Pepe have some prepared questions that I think have kind of come across in the past from folks. So we'll chat through some of those, but feel free to chime in with any additional questions or even deeper dive questions on any of the topics that we might discuss. You can come off mute and ask them. You can drop them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat window. And yeah, so first, let me start with just a quick intro on myself. As Pepe mentioned, moved to Silicon Valley a little over a decade ago, really with the purpose of trying to pursue entrepreneurship, start a business. Had a couple kind of like failed false starts, but originally met Pear back in 2013 when we were working on a mobile app. And at that point, I don't even know if it was called Pear. It might have just been like Pedgman and Mar Ventures, if I recall correctly.
Probably that was the very beginning.
Yeah, and we met them at we were working on a mobile app, and we met them at a pitch day at Stanford Business School, where me and my co-founders were at the time. And they, after a few conversations, they offered to put in $50,000 on a convertible note. And so we took it, and that kind of accelerated our testing with that mobile app. But really what it did was, as we grew that mobile app, we found or uncovered kind of we felt a bigger opportunity kind of in the mobile app deep linking and attribution space, kind of building tools and technology for other mobile apps. And that's what we ended up working on. What was really amazing with Pear at that time too was they gave us a little bit more money a little bit later, and then we came back to them and said, we are deciding to pivot. We're not going to do anything related to the first business. We wanted to offer you to give the money back. And they said, keep it. We bet on you as founders, not on the idea. And now that really stuck with us. So when I started my second business, Thena, which I'm running now, about 2 years ago, the first people we reached out to was Pear. And they invested in our pre-seed fundraise. And things have gone well since then. So grew Branch to about 550 employees, past 100 million ARR. Still going. It's, doing pretty well as a business. And then started Thena about 2 years ago. And Thena's a little bit more in kind of like the customer service, customer support space, helping more modern companies kind of do customer service and support over messaging platforms and stuff. And yeah, Branch had a really interesting history, which I'll hit on in some of the questions, where we sold to developers first. And actually, the first couple years, everything was kind of free. We had an open source SDK and APIs. And then we started selling more to product managers and marketers. And so we had to kind of move into more traditional sales models, did a bunch of different pricing testing there. And then with Thena, as Pepe mentioned, in the last 2 years, we've gone through a number of different pricing iterations, which I can expand upon through some of the questions as well. So lots to discuss today. Again, drop any questions in the chat or feel free to just chime in live anytime. So with that, I think we'll kind of get kicked off into the channels, Pepe, or sorry, the questions. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, first, can you walk us through how did you come up on pricing at Thena? I think it's a little bit unique because especially at the beginning, it was not on a per seat basis SaaS. So how did you come up with pricing? And then if you can just walk us through that iteration process, what did you test? What hypotheses did you have? And how did these rounds of iterations pan out?
Yeah, great questions. Okay, so there's a lot here. I'll try to break it down into a couple different things. First and foremost, when I'm going to talk about pricing, it's going to be really focused on SaaS. There's obviously non-SaaS businesses, there's B2C businesses. So your pricing strategy and your model is going to really depend on that. But everything that I talk about today, whether it's Branch or whether it's Thena, it's really focused on SaaS. Okay, so in the beginning of Thena, and this is, I think, true for a lot of startups, when you're first kind of getting started, you just don't know. You don't know enough. You don't know what you don't know. And so you just kind of have to pick something. And I think first and foremost, just philosophically, I think the best mindset is your pricing model is going to change. I think people sometimes think about pricing as kind of like this fixed thing, and we view it as almost like a dynamic thing, because you are going to test various different pricing models. You're going to want to change strategies over time. Now, the later you get, the bigger you get, the harder it is to make those pivots, make those changes. So I'm a big fan of kind of testing and iterating early on, because you can go through a lot of iterations when you're small. Once you get bigger, and I saw this at Branch, when we were trying to make some pricing changes, substantial pricing changes when we were 500 employees, holy cow, it's like a multi-year long project, because you have to get so many people involved, and you have to kind of often change a lot of stuff on the engineering side. So first and foremost, your pricing strategy is going to be dynamic, or it should be dynamic. At least that's the way we view it. And you should plan to iterate quickly in the beginning. When it came to like our first few customers, I think some of the best things we did was, or the ones that worked the best, was for the first few design partners, first 10 customers, was just said, it's a flat fee. We are still figuring out our pricing. We worked with them to figure out a rough price that made sense, that they felt they saw value in. And I think that really paid off, because it didn't force us into too constrained of a pricing model. From there, then you can start to test a little bit more. Now, we didn't do that with all of our customers. We did have a couple of early customers that we played around with and tested like channel-based pricing. And there's pros and cons to like doing that early, but I think some of the best ones have been just like early design partners, flat fee, we'll figure it out over time. But you don't have to do that. I think that's kind of like, it was just something that we did. But that was kind of the starting point, flat fee. Then when we had to decide what type of pricing, just to give a little bit of context, with Thena, we kind of help companies do customer success and support over Slack and Microsoft Teams. So for us, it was like, okay, how many Slack channels do you have with customers? And the way we viewed it was, this is going to be a great way to essentially like grow with the company. If they have 100 Slack channels with customers today, and then next year they have 200, that contract size is going to double. And that is true. However, one of the problems that we ran into was, if a company only had 15 Slack channels but they still wanted to use us. The price was so low that it didn't make sense. And so then we were like, okay, we got to introduce kind of a flat fee, platform fee thing. We can maybe waive it, but there's like a minimum amount that we want to charge for at least a B2B SaaS contract. Again, B2C or B2B. If it's B2C, it's going to be a little bit different. But for us, it was like, we want to make at least X per contract, irrespective of the number of channels that they might have or the number of seats that they might have. And you see this pretty consistently with SaaS companies where they'll say, okay, cool, you've got a 24K platform fee, a 10K platform fee or base fee. And then on top of that, you have a variable fee based on some units. That's a pretty common model. So we introduced that where then we had a base fee plus the variable units fee. That helped as well. And then we basically closed, our first 70 customers on that type of model. And I'd say it was decent. I think we started to run into issues in two ways. One, when those contracts were coming up for renewal, some companies had tripled their channel count, but they didn't want to pay triple the price, right? And I could understand why. So we had to kind of go back and revisit, okay, how are we pricing this, et cetera. The second thing that we ran into was this was such a new way of thinking, a new way of pricing, that people didn't have a kind of a reference point. They didn't have a way of thinking because there's nothing else that these companies have used that was priced based on basically Slack channels, like how many Slack channels you have or how many Slack channels you have with customers. And that caused some friction because people they didn't, not having that point of reference to compare it against, it gave them a lot of heartburn trying to understand, like, is this a good value or not? What's interesting about that is then we moved to testing seat-based pricing, which we didn't like in the beginning. We didn't like the idea of seat-based pricing because at that time we're like, oh, well, with AI, it's going to reduce the number of seats that a lot of companies are having. And with layoffs happening quite a bit in tech, like that's going to be harder. But interestingly, and this is counterintuitive for me, we ended up being able to sell larger contracts on the seat-based pricing model. And I think it came down to two different reasons. I think first and foremost, it was something people were familiar with, just in general seat-based pricing. And then second, they were able to compare our seat-based price to another seat-based price that they had. And if we were cheaper, they would feel like they were getting a value. Even though if they were doing channel-based pricing, using our old pricing model, they would have maybe been paying less. So let's say you had a deal that would have been on channel-based pricing, maybe 10K, but on seat-based pricing is 15K. Many companies actually felt better at the 15K, paying 15K, but paying on a seat-based pricing because they had that frame of reference compared to other companies. And for context, like our seat-based pricing may be roughly between 70 to 90 bucks per seat, a lot of per month, and then a lot of SaaS tools that these teams are used to paying. They're used to paying 100, maybe even up to $150 per seat if you're buying Salesforce or Gong or Zendesk or one of these. And so what that said is like they just looked at, Salesforce and Gong seat license price, 150 bucks. Thena seat license price, 75 bucks. They felt like they were getting a heck of a deal with Thena, even though they might have been paying more than if they'd just done channel. That was kind of like the evolution of Thena, and that's where we are today. I think that will continue to change over time. And then there's different kind of variations within the seat base, like what products do you get? What features do you get within a certain seat license? Do you have like a full license, a limited license, an admin license? Who gets what? So there's a lot of like iteration to do there, especially as you continue to add products. But basically for us, it was start with just a flat fee, just get the first couple design partners on that. We did channel-based pricing. We added in a base platform fee in order to bring the minimum up. Then we realized that we could make more money on a per seat basis simply because people were used to paying that. And we were a little bit cheaper than other per seat licenses that they were paying for other tools. Okay, let me pause there. I know that was a lot.
No, thank you.
Hope that's helpful context.
Mike, I have a couple of follow-up questions, but
Great.
A lot of founders that are facing the market for the first time always ask us, should I always charge at the very beginning for the first couple of customers? You alluded to the flat fee, and then we'll figure it out. But in which instances would you maybe give up the product for free, or do you have experience not charging design partners? And then at what point do you start charging them, and how do you have the talk with them in that transition?
Yeah,
Do you have
yeah.
any learnings there?
I do. And what I'll say is that there's no right answer, and there's pros and cons to going with either approach, right? Like, so like one approach is you get your design partners on, give it to them for free, maybe even your first few customers. And in, Branch's case, we gave it basically free for developers. We basically said, if you're a small developer under X size, you can use Branch for free. It's open source. Pros and cons to that, by the way, like it's costly. You still have to support them. There's like costs associated with that. But then you build a nice kind of like foundation of people that later you can charge for. So there's lots of companies that have done that in the past. And again, pros and cons to that. But just thinking about Thena, for example, do you charge at the beginning or do you not? If so, how? If not, then when do you go have that conversation? What are the pros and cons? The pros to charging early, at least in like B2B SaaS, let's say. First and foremost, you are able to validate whether or not people are willing to pay for your solution. That's a big one, simply because like people can build a lot of stuff that might be cool and might solve a pain point, but the rubber meets the road in two different instances. One, are they willing to pay for it? And then two, are they willing to put in the effort to implement it? Now, usually people use the pay as a shortcut for whether or not a company is serious about it. I would also say that like that in today's world, and maybe just like in general in all of history, money is one aspect, time is equally as important. And so like, regardless of whether somebody pays you, I think the bigger question is, does somebody carve out the time to implement your solution and to use your solution? That for me actually that's been like an insight for me. I was always so focused on, are they willing to pay or not? And that's what, like, if you go to business school or if you read some of these books, or like, are people willing to pay? Like, people have to put their money where their mouth is. I think time is as important, if not more important, than are people willing to pay a monetary value, because time, especially when things are kind of constrained and everyone's very busy, if somebody's not willing to put in the time to implement your solution, regardless of whether they're willing to pay you, that's a problem, because then they might pay you for the first year, but if they never put in the time to implement and use your solution, they're not going to renew. So, but if people are willing to put in the time and effort to implement your solution, regardless of whether they're paying you up front, that's a good sign from my perspective. Okay. But you get to validate that, right? But I think you can validate it with whether or not they're putting time rather than the money. The other benefit is obviously like revenue coming in is better in theory than no revenue. What I would say is, yeah, it depends, right? Like, I don't think it's going to be material enough to really change your P&L, and it's probably not going to be substantial enough that it's going to like change anything downstream. But it can still be nice to see money coming into your bank account. Oh, one of the other problems with charging, once you start charging, you got to figure out things like your invoicing, your accounting for it. Like, so there's those additional things that like sometimes it's nice to kind of delay that for 6 months, 9 months, maybe, and wait so that you can focus on building the right products. But as soon as you start charging, and then you got to figure out invoicing and collections and all that sort of stuff, and you're like, oh man, you're wasting time and precious resources doing that rather than building the right product up front. So those are kind of some of the pros and cons. Oh, one more. And Pepe and Anna, close your ears. When it comes to venture capital, for better or worse, investors like to see the shape of your revenue curve bend up. And there's kind of this concept of, once you start charging, it essentially starts the clock. Like, let's say you're an investor and they want to see how quickly you go from $0 to $1 million. Well, if you start charging on day one and you just kind of like, there's still a bunch to build, you haven't figured stuff out, and it's this kind of a slow roll for months and months and months and months, and then you start to grow from there. That's a much longer time period from 0 to 1 million. than if like you spend 9 months with design partners building a ton of product and then you start charging, but you have more product, you have more features. Maybe you have more people that you can tap into for revenue. And then that ramp from 0 to 1 million might be much quicker. This is like, it depends on the investor. Some people pay attention to this, some people don't, but I think it's a pretty common pitfall to charge early. And then that starts the clock of how quickly did you get to 1 million. For context, Branch did the extreme opposite of we built the product, we launched, we gave it basically for free for 2 years. Then we turned on monetization. When we turned on monetization, we went from 0 to 500K in 1 quarter. In the first year, we went from 0 to 5 million or 4.5 million. Super fast ramp, but there was also 2.5 years of building behind it and 2.5 years of like spending behind it. But investors look at that and they're like, oh my God, look how quickly you're growing. They kind of ignored the fact that we'd spent 2.5 years building this product, spending money, bringing on people, having free users that then we tapped into for the monetization. So again, pros and cons there. That's one of the things that even with Thena, if I were to go back and do it, I wouldn't charge for those first 3 design partners that we charged early on. I would have waited because it would make our kind of chart of 0 to 1 million look a little bit sharper, which investors obviously love seeing. So just something to think about. There's no right or wrong answer. You can go either way, but those are some things that I think about now.
Perfect. I'm sure, Mike, you've been in a lot of tough pricing conversations with customers throughout your years of experience. We have a lot of technical founders that have never talked about pricing with customers. How would you recommend getting ready? Or do you have any best practices when the moment of having that conversation comes? How do you prepare to have the pricing conversation?
Yeah, good question. I think I'm just taking notes here. I think there's 3 different things that I'd probably say just off the top of my head. First and foremost, if you have data and so any sort of analysis that shows the impact and they've validated it, especially, that's hugely impactful, right? If you go in and say, you started using our tool, according to this data, you saved 35% of, 5 people's times, daily effort. How much, how does that resonate? Does that sound like it's right? They're like, yeah. I'm like, how valuable is that? Oh, it's very valuable. I can grow my customer base without adding more people. Okay, sounds like that's really valuable. That data can be really powerful because it kind of sets their mindset in like how much value is there in this product. If you don't have something that the data clearly shows, doesn't mean you can't have good pricing, but a good pricing conversation, but it does mean it might be a little bit harder for them to see the value. That's really ultimately what you're trying to get. You're trying to get them to see the value, feel like, oh my God, I'm going to save $1 million with this tool. So when you come in and you say, great, it's $100,000 for the tool for the year, for them, that should be a no-brainer, right? I'm going to save $1 million and I only have to spend $100,000. But if they don't have that data, it's a little bit harder for them to justify a $100,000 purchase. That's the first part. So we'll call that data. The second is discovery. And what I mean by that is just like in any sort of sales motion, and I had to get good at this because I'm an engineer by trade and then like never had done sales and then just had to learn on the job. Discovery means asking them questions, meaning like it's easy and common to like just be like, they say, okay, how much does it cost? And you're like, okay, it is $15,000 for the year, or it is $80,000 for the year. The problem with that is you're not matching to what they care about, what they're thinking about, what they're prioritizing about. And so discovery, what it does is it allows you to not only understand the value that they see, but also what's important to them. And I've seen this over, obviously probably like hundreds, if not like thousands, maybe 1,000 like contracts over the years where people care about different things. Some people care about, what are my billing terms? Do I pay quarterly or annually? Is it net 30 or net 90? Some people care about, okay, what's the cheapest price you can give me? Some people are not price sensitive. They're willing to pay more, but they might require more onboarding help, more, more assistance from your team. So everyone cares about different things. You got to figure out what the variables are that they care about and what you're willing to give. Because like in standard negotiation strategy, there's basically like there's there's asymmetry in what somebody might care about and what you might care about. If they care about something a lot, and to you it's like, okay, cool, like you'll get this deal done if we can do net 60 billing terms, no problem. Like totally fine with that. And so those types of things, understanding what they care about or don't care about matters. And I've seen the inverse of that too, where you think they care about something a lot. You go in and like you throw something out there and they're like, that's not material to me. I don't care. Like, cool that you're offering that. And now you've offered something that gives like hurts you, but also adds no value to them in the negotiation strategy. So doing discovery. And so often if somebody like were to ask me, hey, Mike, how much does this cost? What's the price? First of all, I usually don't give price over written communication because that's just a very transactional, what's it cost? Okay, let me tell you. This isn't the grocery store. Like you're not going in to buy a bag of chips and it's $2.99. This is kind of a negotiation because there's so many different variables because it's so complex. It's not like bag of chips in exchange for money. There might be 5 or 10 different variables that you're negotiating or figuring out. And so I'll say, well, it really depends on the kind of what you're looking to do. Let's get on the phone, let's discuss. And then when we get on the phone, it won't be me telling them what the price is. Instead, it will be me asking them questions like, okay, so how many seats are you looking to have? Well, we have this. Okay, how many people are going to be working in this? How many people are going to be doing this other thing? To what degree do they need this? And then I'll try to work through other things. Okay, what do you care about? What's the timing? What's the sensitivity, like timing sensitivity on this? Is there anything, any impending event that might happen or that's coming up? And I've had people be like, oh yeah, let's say August 21st. I've had people say like, oh yeah, by September 1st, my boss has told me we need a solution in place today. That gives us a lot of leverage. If somebody says you have 9 days to get a solution in place, like they're probably not going to care about the price as much. They're going to care about how quickly can I get this done and does it solve my needs. So those types of things typically come out in more of a verbal kind of live conversation, which is why I'll typically try to get on the phone with them. If they refuse, then I might ask a few questions over email or Slack, depending on what it is, try to understand a little bit what they're trying to get out of, and then provide the pricing. The one other kind of caveat here too, people like options. Meaning if you understand that there's like maybe 3 different main levers that they have, like number of seats, the number of channels, and the timing or something like that, what you can do is you can come up with 3 different options. You can do 2 options. I probably wouldn't do more than 3. Once you start getting into like 4 options, and it's like, I don't know, there's too many options basically. I'm a big fan of 3 because what you can do is you can give kind of like your preferred option, another decent option, and then like a bad option. The bad option makes the other options look good. And there's like, I think there's case studies. Some people that have been to business school have probably come across them. There's case studies about like the different pricing strategies there, which we won't need to get into. But basically, if like you give like a really like a bad option, it makes the other ones look more decent. But you want to kind of steer them and incentivize them to go towards the option ideally that you care about the most, whatever that may be. And so you give multiple options if you need to, and you say, okay, great. If you want 5 seats and these products, it's this, but this other thing gives you 9 seats, so you have more growth, but you have limited access to these other things, or maybe you need to pay this other fee. So just giving options during the pricing conversation can be helpful. Okay, and then the third point. I don't know the best way to say this other than if you're not like a seasoned sales professional who naturally is used to this, so I'm not a seasoned sales professional. I've never been natural with like sales. I just kind of like figure it out. It is almost uncomfortable to look at somebody and be like, and give them a price. It just feels weird because like you built a cool product and like that giving them that product isn't actually going to cost you that much more, but you're pricing based on value. And so to go to somebody and sit in a room and be like, it'll be $125,000 for the year feels really awkward. What I've tried to mentally do myself is go in with this mindset of get comfortable with the discomfort. So basically being like, if this is uncomfortable, that's the sign that I should do it. And because I think what happens is, and I've done this in the past, it's uncomfortable. So then I negotiate against myself. I'm like, we should charge them $125,000. You get in the room and you're uncomfortable. So you're like, yeah, don't really be 125,000, but like, we really want to work with you. So like, whatever you think is fair. If you want to do 90, 80, 70, 50, like we'll do it, like whatever you think makes sense. That's terrible negotiation tactic. So get comfortable with the discomfort, figure out what the value is up front, go in, say it. And then obviously the classic pricing and negotiation tactic, then shut up and let them talk. Because if you say it's $125,000 and then you wait a second and they don't say anything or react, and you say, but if that's too much, just like we can do 100,000, we can do 90,000. Terrible strategy. So get comfortable with the discomfort and just like embrace it almost to some degree. Okay, those are the three. So use the data to your advantage, do a lot of discovery. There's a sub note in there in terms of like giving pricing options, 2 or 3 different options for them because people like choice. And then the third is getting comfortable with discomfort.
Great 3 tips. I'm sure we'll take them and apply them in our next pricing conversation. I have a lot more questions, but I want to ask you the last one before we open up to the audience. Can you tell us a little bit more how you've managed? Well, first, how have you assessed price sensitivity and how have you managed price increases in the past, right? Any best practice, any fatal errors or mistakes you've made in managing pricing increases? Anything you can share about testing price sensitivity from customers and managing price increases?
Yeah. Transparently, I'm still figuring this out. I'm still learning on this even a decade in, just because it's hard. It's hard when people are anchored on paying something and then you want to come in and charge them 50% more, 100% more, right? I think it comes down to, again, a lot of information around discovery. Like, okay, we're 10 months into the relationship. We're coming up on the renewal in a couple months. First and foremost, I wanted to ask how Thena has benefited you and the value that you've seen it. And, if somebody says, oh my God, it's been a game changer. It's been amazing. We've like saved so much time, or we've avoided these costs. That gives you more information and data to be able to come back to them and say, great, and then have that conversation. You can ask like the negative. You can ask like, what are, any concerns, or what are your concerns coming up upon the renewal? If somebody like answers that with, well, we're paying 24K, but I'm not sure we're getting that value, immediately that you're not going to be able to, or it's going to be harder to increase the price if they already don't see value. But if they say the opposite, if they say, you ask what their concerns are, and they say, well, we're going to grow quite a bit this year, and I'm worried that as we double our team size or double our customer size, that the contract is going to double or triple. Well, that opens up the conversation to be able to say, okay, tell me more about that. They give you more details. Like, okay, cool. Well, based on how you're priced, if your team doubles, it would double the contract size. But maybe there's something that we can do to work within there on this renewal. And then that's when you can introduce other things that might value you, right? You might care in that case for locking in a 2-year contract instead of a 1-year contract on the renewal, because that saves you time, that saves you effort, it reduces risk, all that sort of stuff. So you might say, they might be worried that the contract is going to double. You might be willing to say, okay, great. Based on this, the contract is going to increase, but we can knock a little bit off if you're willing to commit to a 2-year agreement. And that could be a way, as an example, to get a win while also giving a give, but you figure that out through asking those questions like, do you have any concerns, or what concerns do you have coming up on the renewal? Pricing sensitivity really is hard because like some people aren't transparent about it, and some people kind of like keep all the information to themselves close to the vest. Some people are like, listen, I'm paying this other tool $2,000 a month. If I can use you for this as well, then I can churn off of them. You're like, great, we'll capture some of the value, but you'll have some cost savings along the way. And then sometimes you don't have enough information and you simply just need to go in there and say, hey, listen, the price is increasing. However, I don't like the idea, even though some companies need to do this, especially as you get bigger, it's harder to do this conversation with everybody. I don't like the idea of kind of just emailing, like we've all, or like some of us have seen this, where basically a CS person will email, or an account manager will email their customer and say, dear Mike, I know we haven't chatted in 9 months, but upon renewal, your cost is going to grow by 40%. Like, that's a terrible email to get. And regardless of whether or not they see the value and they'd be willing to pay for it, I think that creates a negative perception, versus if you get on the phone with somebody and have a conversation, learn about kind of like the value and ask them questions. And then you say, listen, based on everything, based on your usage, based on the features we've added over the last year, and based on the great deal that you got last year, price is going to increase kind of substantially this year to 40%. They might be more willing to have that conversation. So again, I'm not an expert, but these are just some of the things that I've learned over the years that help me a little bit in some cases.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. And with that, I'm going to open it up. It sounds like Zachary has a question.
Yeah, thank you for calling me. First of all, Mike, I love all of this. So many nuggets of wisdom here, especially just want to emphasize, get comfortable with the uncomfortable, or get out of your comfort zone. It's helped me tremendously in my career. I had 2 questions, actually. The first is, in reflecting on the story that you gave about building the product for 2 years and then not really showing revenue and then seeing a very fast ramp up to 5 million. How much of that revenue came from existing users versus net new business? Second question is not related, but have you ever felt like you've lost control of a pricing conversation by having your customers who may be being charged a different rate sort of talk amongst themselves through a networking event or some other contact, and then sort of coming back to you with awkward questions about why is so-and-so paying more or paying less than I am?
I love these. These are phenomenal questions. Yes, let me talk about the first one. This is basically the concept of, hey, I'm going to build something, give it to people for some extended period of time for free, let's say 2 years, let's say 3 years, whatever it is. And then I'm going to start charging. And then the question is, how many of those come from existing users versus net new? Okay, this is really interesting. You might be surprised to know that a lot of that revenue came from net new users, not necessarily the existing user base, excuse me, upfront. But like, maybe if I'm trying to remember exactly, maybe like half the revenue came from existing, but then half came from net new. Rough like idea. So it wasn't like 90% came from existing users and then only 10% came from net new. Here's why, though. This is my hypothesis. If you spend 2.5 years building and you have a bunch of free users, people using it, whatever, I think there's a couple things that happen. First and foremost, your product is much more feature rich. So like, you've spent the time investing in the products and the features that when you go to somebody 3 years in, 2.5 years in, and they look at your product for the first time, like, wow, there's a lot here. Versus if you go to that person 6 months in, they're going to be like, okay, I can see some stuff, but like, what about all these other features? So what you're able to do is you're able to, first of all, close more business, close more deals, because you're able to satisfy the requirements of a lot more companies. And you're able to charge more because you don't just have feature A, you have feature A, B, C, and D. So like, even if it's coming from net new revenue, it's because you have all of these features. The second thing is, you may have brand awareness already coming into the conversation. So let's say you spend 2.5 years giving the product away to individual users, to consultants, to developers, to whatever, right? Over that time period, people have seen or come across your product and your name. And then when you come to them and you say, hey, I'm doing this thing, it's not like this brand new startup that, just launched that is coming to me and asking, for my time. It's, I'm familiar with whatever. I'm familiar with Thena. And I think that gets you into the door a lot more easily, and it gives you a lot more credibility. There's a call recording software. I mean, there's a lot of call recording softwares, but there's one that I was chatting with somebody recently, and they've been around for 4 years. They spent the first 3 years, 2.5, 3, just giving away free licenses for individual users. It wasn't until this past, call it a year ago, a little over a year ago, that they introduced kind of the paid plan and the teams plan, which then allowed groups, leaders, to be able to say, okay, I want this for all of my people. Well, they had a few, I think like 1 million people using their product already, and people had already been seeing their name for the last 3 years. So then when you get, somebody's looking for something, they might go proactively do it and they find the team plan and they go buy it. So I think it's those two things for us, at least. It's like the feature rich piece and the brand awareness piece that you've spent a number of time building. But with your existing users, you do have an opportunity to tap into them. The challenge, one side note, the challenge with existing users and asking them to pay later is the person that's been using your software for free for 2 years, that then you say, hey, can you pay us? Like the response, they're anchored at zero. Like it's really hard to take somebody anchored at zero and then ask them for money. There's two main ways that I've seen people do this that's been pretty effective. First is you add completely new product lines, and those are the ones you charge for. You're like, hey, I know you've been using, like, this is what we did at Bridge. Hey, I know you've been using this thing. It's very, it's basic, it's rudimentary, it's been adding value, but we built these 3 new things that are like really more feature rich. And people are like, oh, that's cool. And you're like, cool. These are premium products. You have to pay for them. But you can at least have that conversation because you have that person. And then the second way that I've seen people do this, and this is fairly common in kind of like the bottoms up type of products where you go get an individual user and then you try to sell to the company. And this is basically like you go in, individual people have like started using your product, but then you go into the leader and you say, hey, leader, there's 8 different people at your company that are using DocuSign, that are using Calendly, that are using whatever. You have no control, no visibility. We have all these features for leadership and for the team that you can use if you buy the team license. We did this with Zapier. Like we had a bunch of people using Zapier, and then I bought a Teams license to basically bring us all together. It was amazing. And I was happy to do it because we were already getting a bunch of value. So that's like a nice way that I've seen people tap into the existing revenue. Go to the leader, go to the team, go to the company and say, you've got all these people using it. You should get on Teams license. Okay. And then, so that's the first question. Revenue coming from your existing user base, new user base, if you give something away for free for a while. Second question was kind of like people talking at conferences or events, talking about different rates. Like for me, at least in B2B SaaS, it's never really been a problem. Sometimes it happens, but usually it's like, oh, well, they're on a different plan. Because there's always different variables, right? Again, it's not like you're going to the grocery store and it's $2.99 at Walmart, but it's $3.50 at Target. What the heck, right? It's much more complex than that. And it might be like, yeah, they got a better price, but it's because they have access to fewer features. They have different billing terms. They signed a 2-year deal. They gave us a case study, whatever it is. There's all these different variables that can go into the price. And so anytime anyone's ever brought that up in the past, like their contract structure is totally different than yours, which is why they have a different price. We look at a bunch of different variables, and that basically shuts it down. For the most part, that's been my experience, at least.
Perfect. Zachary, I know you have another question, but it sounds like Charles has a question too. So maybe we go to Charles and then come back to Zachary if we have time.
Thanks for that. Quick question about pricing transparency for SaaS. When, early in your kind of go-to-market strategy, you're trying to get eyeballs on your product and, make it accessible. But for B2B software, how do you think about when to put up specific prices on a pricing page versus have the kind of call us, we'll talk?
My short answer is I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. My slightly longer answer is first of all, I think it depends on like the type of product you're selling and who you're selling to. And if you're selling like a premium product, if you're selling like decent contract sizes, if you want a salesperson to talk to every single person, then you can force people to talk to you and say, call us or whatever. Or you can put a couple basic plans in there, and then basically it's so limited that people have to submit a demo and call you. The risk there is then they get anchored on like, if you put like, oh, that's a $89 a month plan, but your actual sales-led plan is like $1,000 a month. People are going to be anchored on the $89. So that can be a risk or a challenge. If you but I've seen, and we've heard this from people that basically like in periods where we didn't have pricing on it, basically said, call us. I've had people like, I find out later, like, oh yeah, I looked at you, but there was no pricing on the website. I had to talk to you guys. So I just left and didn't buy you guys, or I went and found something else. So it can backfire in that sense. If you're doing like smaller deals, you kind of want to just pre-qualify the people up front. Because you don't want to waste your time with somebody if getting on a call with somebody that's not willing to pay, that's only willing to pay $100 a month, right? Like that's probably not going to be worth your time. So like if high volume, probably easier or better to put pricing, be transparent with your pricing up front. Lower volume, you can probably get away with less transparency, at least in the beginning. That said, people still like to have an idea. But I think if you're selling a little bit more upmarket, people are used to like knowing that they need to talk to somebody that they're not going to pay what the basic plan fee is, that there's going to be some additional or different higher fee for them. If they're like a bigger, more legit company. So, and then if it's just like individual licenses, then that falls in the first category of just high volume, just put your pricing up there. And I think that's fine to start. So not a perfect answer because I don't know. And I think it also really just depends quite a bit on the type of company and the type of company you are, and also the type of customer you're serving. But for Thena, just real quick, Thena, at first we didn't have pricing for the first, quarter or two. Then we put pricing on it on the website. It definitely backfired a lot because like there were times when we'd get into an enterprise pricing conversation and we'd be like, all right, for you, it's going to be $12,000. They'd be like, well, on your website, it says $5 per channel. And based on that, I want that plan. Like, I don't want your enterprise plan. I want that plan. I want your startup plan. We're like, well, you don't qualify for that. Like, yeah, but $5 per channel. I want the 4K deal, not the 12K deal. And you're like, well, so it made a lot of conversations very awkward and hard. So there are downsides to putting pricing on too early.
Perfect. Thank you. We're approaching the end of the conversation, so please prepare your questions if you have any. Zachary, you had a follow-up question, so maybe we can go back to that. And
Cool.
For the others, let me know if you have any remaining questions.
Cool. So Zachary's follow-up question was, what was the catalyst or market signal when you decided to turn on revenue at Branch? It wasn't like an overnight thing. It was we had a ton of people using us for free. We had a lot of conversations about like, if we were to charge, what are some things we could do? What would that look like? But then we basically came across a couple different product ideas that were like that were pretty cool, that were new, that were innovative, that nobody else was really doing, that our customers had asked for. And that's when we decided that we were going to build those and make them just premium products. Because could we have given them away for free? Yes. I don't think it made sense to, because they were like pretty feature rich. So basically what we ended up doing was, it just kind of like naturally happened where we had 3 different products that we were working on, product lines all at the same time, roughly at the same time. And we decided, let's make these premium products. We've already given enough away for free. We have a bunch of people using the basic stuff, the SDKs, the APIs. Let's make these premium products and charge for them. That was like basically it. So there wasn't necessarily a lot of like strategy put into it beyond just the way things were happening. We were building some products. So we had a lot of conversations about whether or not we should do it, because there's always pros and cons to charging. Like sometimes you want to not charge for something because it's a leader into other product lines, either through virality. Like sometimes it's like a feature can give you virality that then causes other people to come in and actually pay for your solution. Or sometimes what's known as a loss leader is you'll take a loss on something because you know that it'll lead somebody to a different product that you'll make a lot more money on. It's kind of like why IKEA will sell a $1 or $2, whatever, toilet brush. Even though they may or may not be losing money on it, at the very least, maybe at best, they're breaking even. They don't care about the toilet brush. They care about you going to IKEA to buy the toilet brush, and then while you're there, seeing a couch you like, and then spending $800 on the couch, right? So like you can do things like that to kind of bring people in. But for us, those are the premium products, or the nice new products that we were building that we decided to make premium and charge for.
All right. Any other last questions? Otherwise, I have my very final question for Mike.
Cool.
No more questions. Please unmute yourself if you have any last thoughts. Okay, well, we like to ask this to all our guests. Mike, what's your secret recipe to maintaining a winning mindset and driving momentum, especially in the face of challenges? How do you keep that growth and winning mentality?
Just taking a note here. Let me think about this for a minute. I think for me, what I've found is the results ultimately come from consistency. Just showing up every day, putting in the work. And you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. You're going to have good months or quarters and even years in some cases. Like I've had whole years that are just like, man, this is a rough year. And I think what I've found for myself has paid off or does pay off is recognizing that, yeah, there's good days and bad days, good weeks and bad weeks, and you're going to have challenges along the way. But if you show up consistently, it's those people that I've found tend to win a decade later, 2 decades later. And I think if you look in hindsight at a lot of people that have succeeded, it's because they just put in that work consistently. And if like when you're in kind of a slump or when you have a bad day, a bad week, if you then stop showing up or stop caring, I think that's when you lose that momentum. So for me, when I wake up and it's a bad day, it's a bad morning, it starts off rough for whatever reason, I just try to think, just get through it. Just show up, do the work. And there's another day that it'll be better. And then over a long enough time horizon, I think you end up winning.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll leave this session thinking about the power of showing up. Thank you, Mike, for all these insights. Congratulations on the repeated success. And thanks so much for being a great friend of Pear. And for everyone who attended this session, stay tuned for our upcoming sessions. As you know, we do these every other week. So we're excited to see you in the future. Also, let us know if you have any candidates or people that you think we should have a conversation with. And I would like to congratulate everyone for committing to winning big in GTM. You guys are one step closer to winning today by learning from Mike. So congratulations on that. And thank you everyone for participating. See you very soon. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Pepe. See you later, everybody.